On Public Education, House Committee on Public Education come to order. The clerk call roll.
Representative Huberty?
Here.
Representative Bernal? Here. Representative Allen? Representative Allison? Here. Representative Ashby? Here. Representative Bell?
Here.
Representative Dutton? Representative Gonzalez? Representative King? Representative Meyer? Representative Sanford?
Here.
Representative Tallarico?
Here.
And Representative Van Dever.
Here.
All right. Quorum is present. So we're going to jump back in. I know that several of you have a commitment, and so feel free to leave when you need to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy yourselves. Don't get hurt. We don't need wheelchairs on the dais today. So or next week for that matter. All right, where did we leave off? We left with Joe, and so Joe had to leave, right? And so are you the new Joe?
I am Heather Mose with TEA, the Director of the Charter Division.
Okay. So Heather is now, we have, Joe should have been scratched off, and this is what we're going to be working off of, correct? Is that right? Did she sign up on the, okay, she signed up, okay. All right, good deal. All right, Heather, the show is yours.
So I'll be walking you through the slide deck. So the charters. No. Do you need me to do that first, Amy? Okay. Sorry, I did not sign up.
That's all right. We'll get you afterwards.
Chapter 12 of TEC outlines the establishment of charter schools, and that was passed in 1995. The state monitors and accredits charter schools just as the state monitors and accredits traditional school districts. There are reduced regulations in exchange for the flexibilities that encourage innovation, and the state fiscal first rating and the state accountability performance reporting ratings apply to charter schools. Within the portfolio, or actually within Chapter 12, there are provisions for 4 types of charter schools. We have Subchapter B, C, D, and E. We reference Subchapter C charter schools as district authorized charters. There are no Subchapter B charters. Those are complete conversions of school districts. The portfolio that I oversee is primarily, or is the Subchapter D and E charter schools. We have predominantly 501c3 nonprofits who operate the Subchapter D charter schools, and universities. We have a small portion of our portfolio that is overseen by universities. Going on to slide 4. Our oversight in my office consists of new schools, which is the application process, growth and support that we provide to existing charters through amendment processes, and in addition to first ratings and performance accountability ratings, we also provide for oversight in the charter school performance framework. The demographics of our portfolio, there is an ethnic distribution outlined on slide 6 that compares traditional ISDs to charter schools. In terms of our demographics, you'll see that charter schools serve 19% African American students, 60% Hispanic students, 15% white students, and 7% others. With the African American demographic and the Hispanic demographic, you'll see an increase in those percentages in comparison to traditional districts. If we look at the student groups on slide 7, enrollment comparisons between charter schools and traditional districts, economically disadvantaged, 69% charter schools in comparison to 59% traditional ISDs. Limited English proficient, LEP, students, 24% are represented in the charter school portfolios compared to 19% in the traditional ISDs. 52% of our students in the charter school portfolio are at risk in comparison to 50% in traditional ISDs. Mobility, we have 23% of the students high mobility in comparison to 15%. And then underrepresentation by 2% in special ed student group, 7% in comparison to 9%, and that's on slide 7.
Heather, do you think that the SPED population underrepresentation is specific to under-identification, or it's the populations of students just not applying to go to these schools, or is it the charters not accepting them? 3 different questions.
And not to skirt, but it probably is an amalgamation of all 3, to be quite honest.
Okay. So you think charters are under-identifying more so than what an ISD would be to not provide services, or do you think it's they just don't have the capacity to identify?
I'm not sure of the instances that would create the under-identification. Certainly when charter schools are awarded and throughout all our supports, they understand the identification process with special ed students, the need to provide services. Certainly if those students come to their school with the identification already, that can't impact their admission and they have to provide services. As far as identifying students that are currently enrolled that are not identified as special ed in that process, I don't have that information, but there might be instances where particularly our single campus charters don't have the extensive supports to identify.
Question,
Mr. Brown?
For both the at-risk category and the special ed categories, or beneath those headings, or as a variety of other indicators and identifiers, right? PEMS codes and whatnot. I'm wondering if there's a way for us to get information on that distribution. So I always say that, special education is a very broad term, like weather, but then there's different kinds of weather, and I'm wondering if the distributions hold up that way, or if there really is a break in what kids are in traditional ISDs and what kids under the special ed banner and what kids are in charters. And if there's a way for us to get that distribution, that'd be very helpful.
I think we can certainly get the nuanced information in PEMS in terms of what their identification is.
Thank you.
Special ed.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right, I'm going on to slide number 8. So as I've attested and as is reflected, charter schools operate at a higher percent of high poverty campuses than the state average. Statewide, 68% of our students have less than 80% of students who are economically disadvantaged, and 32% are greater than 80% economically disadvantaged. This is mirrored in the traditional ISDs data, whereas charter schools, you'll see that there is a closer to 50-50 representation. When looking at our sector, it is interesting to note that charter awards, and when I talk about charters, I'm talking about them at LEA level, a district level, and the award of charters and closures over time, we have not seen significant gains of the LEA awards, and part of that is because of the growth we've seen in the campus level that I'll be talking about in a couple slides, but high quality authorizing on the forefront, and then also closing down charter schools that were low performing and met criteria that was outlined in 12.115 and 12.1141. We've closed a substantial number of charter schools and their associated campuses, as reflected on slide 11.
So just to clarify, you awarded in 18 4 new ones and took away 5.
That is correct.
Okay. This isn't campus-based, this is actual charter, brand new charters that you're awarding, correct?
That is correct. And another piece of information, certainly when charter schools are first awarded, we see them scaling up, and so where they might request 2 campuses, They only opened one in the first year, and so that is also reflected in the numbers of campuses.
How many campuses though were open this year?
I think all of our operators opened their single campus. And that is something else that we've tried to support in slow growth. The charters that are awarded not opening 3 campuses at once, but
Right. I guess let me ask the question differently. IDEA, KIP, yes, those kind of guys. How many do they replicate campuses this year? Do we know?
significant number, and those are addressed in the amendments. We had
This one.
over 127 amendments this cycle. That data is in the appendix. Inclusive of that is some of the
One of the concerns that was brought up was that in the School Finance Commission, this was brought up by Senator West, was that it seems like even if they've got schools that are high-performing schools, regular traditional ISDs, very high-performing schools, is that we've got charters opening up right across the street. And so do you not look at where they're placing the actual physical structures of these buildings, or how does that happen?
So within both the application process and the amendment process, that's where we'll see school growth. We see the application process is a proposal, and that proposal includes general areas of operation. It's not until they're awarded that they then have the green light to go ahead and start securing either land or lease space. We have provisions in our office to notify traditional districts of the locations of those schools once they've been identified. So we do know when and where they have isolated where they're opening, but it's not in the application process. It's not until after the award. We also require certificates of occupancy prior to the charter school campuses serving students at those facilities. Within the amendment process, it is not as, it's on a much shorter runway. The amendment process will see anywhere from 6 to 18 months. A charter school is requesting to open a new campus under their existing operations, again with that proposed area. The commissioner, pursuant to the state law, has 60 days to make those determinations. Within those 60 days, then we start to get, once the commissioners provided them a response or a decision on that amendment request, then we'll start to get the information on where they're operating. In my office, what we've started to do in this last year is also notify the ISDs, the traditional school districts, of those addresses as soon as we become aware of them.
But you can't say no, basically, to that. Meaning if there's a magnet school in Houston or Dallas or something like that, and they decide to pop up a charter school directly across the street, you don't say no.
The commissioner takes all the information into consideration when making his determinations.
They asked it differently. The 127 expansions this year, did you turn one down for location?
I know we turned some down. I would have to look for the reason, so
I'd like
yes.
to know that, please.
Certainly.
All right. Go ahead.
On slide 12, you'll see the growth of the portfolio. Our portfolio serves 5.5% of Texas students, and the growth has occurred over time through the campus expansions. In 2013, Senate Bill 2 lifted the cap on charters, but as I said earlier, we really haven't seen the growth in terms of the LEA level, but we have seen it at the campus level. So high quality charter operators have been expanding their operations.
Oh, they show Chairman Dutton present.
In terms of accountability, with our new accountability A through F system, what we did was on slide 14, we aggregated that accountability and used scale scores to account for single campus charters, single campus charters currently. I believe Jamie Crow this morning had given you accountability information. Single campus charters were rated at a Met Standard IR, and so we looked at the scale scores to equate what an A through F rating would look like. The comparison with charters on the left to independent school districts on the right. Charters are doing a lot of great things, as you can see in that bottom sector, but as you can see in the top sector as well, there's a lot more work to do. We took in slide 15 and looked at the ratings for high poverty LEAs using a 70% threshold, not an 80% threshold.
It's always changing.
And you can see the predominance of charter
Yeah.
schools that are serving high poverty students.
Chairman, real quick.
Representative Bernal.
I think for future discussions, it'd be helpful if we could settle on a standard definition of high poverty.
Okay.
I think today, right now it's 70, earlier today was 80, and then there's another graph where it was 50. That's not me wagging my finger, I'm just saying it would be helpful if we could just set
Agreed.
pick one.
I was anticipating that based on Mr. Crow's testimony this morning,
Right.
realized we should have landed on a similar percentage.
Thank you.
So, and we can get
Thank you,
that to you as we recalculate that.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Leo Lopez. I'm the Chief School Finance Officer for TEA. I'm going to walk you through a brief overview of the funding for charter schools under the Foundation School Program. So on slide 17, so charter schools are very similar. The funding formulas are very similar to school districts in that they're entitled to Tier 1 and Tier 2 state aid. However, because charter schools do not have the ability to levy a local tax rate, they don't have a tax base, their entitlements are funded 100% by the state. And so as a result, in order to do that, the charters have to use state average funding formulas for Tier 1 and for Tier 2. For Tier 1, what that means is that we use the state average adjusted allotment for school districts, and we apply that fund charter schools Tier 1 allotments. And then for Tier 2, we calculate the state average tax rates for each component or each portion of Tier 2, and then fund charters as if they had that average tax rate. Charter schools are not eligible for traditional facilities funding under the IFA or EDA programs, the instructional facilities allotment or the existing debt allotment, because again, those serve to help subsidize the debt service payments that school districts make. And again, because charter schools don't have a tax base, those programs really don't apply. However, they do qualify for the NIFA allotment or the new instructional facilities allotment as part of Tier 1. And beginning this year, started qualifying for facilities funding that will actually flow as part of M&O funding. Charter schools can use that to pay debt service on bonds. They can use that for repairs and maintenance on the facilities.
But Leo, not all of them.
Excuse me?
Not all of them, because there's qualifications associated with it.
Yes, that's
It has to
true.
be high-performing charters, right?
That's correct. Yes, and I'll cover that on slide 19. On slide 18, what you have here is trends over the last decade or so. You have school district M&O and maintenance and operations funding in dark blue, and then facilities funding for interest and sinking purposes in light blue. And then charter schools, you have in yellow the maintenance and operations revenue, and then in copper color, and in the current year, you have that new sliver of facilities funding for charter schools. And as you can see by this graph, charter schools do on the aggregate do have slightly more revenue on the maintenance and operations side, but when you compare all-in revenue under the Foundation School Program and including interest and sinking taxes, even for districts that don't receive IFA or EDA, charter schools do have slightly less than school districts on the aggregate. And as Chairman Huberty mentioned, the facilities funding is only for charters that meet minimum academic threshold. Slide 19, to go into more detail. So House Bill 21, as part of the special session last summer or 2 summers ago, created this facilities allotment. So it created a $60 million allotment that would go to charter schools. and we would fund that at the state average interest and sinking tax rate, which is around 21 cents. However, because it's capped at 60 million, you have to prorate that down in order to arrive at the per student amount, which is roughly about $200 right now, subject to change as we get final student enrollment in charter schools. That per student amount will change a little bit. However, the total statewide aggregate amount will be fixed at $60 million. And again, the academic requirements are that the charter schools must have an acceptable performance under Chapter 39 of the Education Code in order to be eligible for this allotment. And that concludes those formal remarks. There's a few other slides in the appendix, and I think we're both available for questions.
Chairman Dutton has a question.
Let me ask you a question, Leo. Charter schools affect or can affect whether a school district is a Chapter 41 school. Is that true?
So to the extent that a school district loses student enrollment to attend a charter school within that district's boundaries, and that causes the district's wealth per student to increase, that could potentially cause an increase in, that could either cause that district to become a Chapter 41 district, or it could increase the amount of recapture that district is paying.
Well, I've been trying to work myself into the position of why that's. If charter schools are public schools, why should that be the case?
So currently, the recapture formulas under Chapter 41 operate on a basis of a wealth per student, and so what we do is we take the tax base in the district boundaries and we divide it by the number of weighted students in that district. And so when you reduce the number of students,
absent the charter school
yes,
numbers.
sir, after the charter schools, or if a student leaves for any number of reasons, if enrollment's declining in general, charter schools could be one reason. So when
does that mean then that charter school students have no wealth per student?
Yes, that's exactly right. Charter schools don't have a tax base, so we can't calculate a wealth per student per se in the traditional sense.
Yeah, but the wealth base is based on the amount of wealth in the district, irrespective of whether or not they happen to be charter school students or traditional public school students, right?
No, we take only the students that are enrolled in that district. So if a student leaves a district, then we no longer count that student in the calculation.
But that's what's troubling me. I've tried to understand y'all's philosophy regarding that, but I don't get it. I'm not quite there, because if what you're trying to determine is the wealth in a district per student, that would seem to include even charter school students. I mean, unless what you're saying is you're trying to determine wealth per students who actually are being taught in that district.
Yes, sir. I believe the calculation is trying to get to the wealth per student and then the amount of revenue available at that district.
That's right.
For those students.
Right, for all of the students in that district.
That attend that district.
Not just absent the charter school students, but it would include those, wouldn't it?
Currently, that's not how the statute
Right.
is working.
Because presumably the wealth in a district was created for all of the students there, correct?
You mean? I'm sorry. Can you restate that?
The wealth is based on the values of the property in that school district, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And that was created by entities who were trying to do something regarding all of those students, right?
So the tax base is just the mark, essentially the value of the property. So residential, commercial property.
Yeah, but
in
what
the
I'm
district.
saying is you just take it out on the divisor side,
Mm-hmm.
but on the other side, the wealth that goes to those students who are now in charter schools remains. I mean, you don't take out the wealth of those the wealth that was created for those charter school students, but you take out those charter school students, so you have a inflated value when you talk about wealth per student.
I understand what you're saying, and so I think so one example, I think the way it's done right now is if you have a family that sends their child to a charter school, they're still paying property taxes to the school district.
Right.
So even though the district doesn't have that student enrolled and doesn't have to bear the cost of educating that student, they are still receiving the revenue from the property taxes from that family. And
Right.
so I think that's why the current calculation includes the value of that home in the calculation of the wealth. Of course, the legislature could certainly craft something different.
Well, it just bothers me because I think what we end up doing is we end up treating charter schools as if they're not public schools, essentially. And yet, out of the other side of our mouth, we say charter schools are indeed public schools. And it seems to me, for example, if you had a district, and I just want to see if you follow me, if you had a district where all of the students in that district were in charter schools, the wealth per student would be zero. That wouldn't make sense, would it?
That'd be interesting to try to calculate that.
Well, trying to understand it, that's why I was trying to understand it, because I kept thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. But anyway, I want you all to think about that, because what we did is we created charter schools, I believe, in 1995. And then after that, we created the recapture without any thoughts to what charter schools' effect on recapture would be. And I'm just proposing that we ought to think about that, because rather than let the outcome just show up and be what it is. Okay?
I understand.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, can I follow up with that just real quick? I want to make, we've heard, I know Chairman Dutton's heard this, so I think all of us that have been around for long enough have heard this about the charter school argument of they're getting more money than the regular ISDs, but you're showing us something that's different because the ISDs get the M&O and the INS, and you're showing us a higher, on average, they're getting
Yes.
more than what the traditionals are, right? Now, you haven't added in the facilities funding yet, but you add that in and that adds another percentage or something along those lines, right?
Yes, sir.
Is that right? Okay. And so, to go with, Houston ISD is probably one of the best examples. They probably have some of the largest population. They at least have 10% of the charter kids in the state, I'm guessing, somewhere probably in excess of that. And they've complained that it's unfair because they don't get as much money, and so those schools should be on there. But if I'm reading this right, is that the adjustment for the charter schools are funded like the small schools. The small school
Yes.
allotments, correct?
Yes, sir.
Including the 300 square mile rule, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, to the degree where somebody says, well, they should be funded like the small schools, they are. But then the other argument is they should be funded like the school districts in which they represent. But they're not, because they're not getting the M&O piece of that.
Yes, the INS.
The INS
yes.
piece of that, I'm sorry. Right? Yeah. So is there a better way to do it?
There are different ways to do it.
I said a better way.
I think there's always room for improvement in anything you do.
Jesus. He's been with me for too long. He knows he's not going to answer me. That's all right. I'll just take him in the back and beat the crap out of him. So, and you'll give me the answer. What do you think, Heather?
I think my colleague succinctly answered your question.
Where's Marath?
So the current, there used to be a different way of funding charter schools, and we've moved to a state average.
Yeah.
So initially, the charter schools were funded on a resident district basis. So we would actually fund that student's attendance based on their resident district. So in the past, the legislature certainly has.
But that would if I was a charter school, then I would start picking the districts that tax at the highest rate based upon that.
Depending on how you
Wouldn't you?
structure the formulas.
Right.
That's what I would do. I mean, if I was a charter school operator, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to open the next one in Humble ISD because they're taxing it $1.17, you know, and whatever else it would be, right? I mean,
Yes,
that's the way you would do that.
That would be a strategic consideration.
Right. And that becomes a problem. So go ahead.
So you could.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say you could fund based on a resident district basis. You could fund on a average of the region, or there's a number of or counties. There's a number of different alternatives.
It's something I think we need to think about and look at specifically based upon what's going to happen with the changes to the weights and the formulas and things of that nature right now. I think
Yes, sir.
we need to think about how that's all going to work. Look, we want them to be successful too. We're not suggesting that. I just want to make sure that they're handling this in the correct manner. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
and to that point, I was wondering if there's a way, and again, I know you guys have a lot of work to do, but I'm looking at slide 18, and I'm seeing the money. The strange thing about charters to me is just the average of the average. I think is a blunt instrument, and it probably works out in some cases really well. In other cases, like in my district, if you've got an 1882 school, I mean, there's a school of 400. I like that they're getting this, by the way, but there's a school of 400 kids who partners with a charter, and all of a sudden that one school of 400 is getting $650,000 more a year. I'm just saying there's a difference.
Yes, sir.
My question is, when we do the average, is that before or after things like the transportation allotment?
So in this slide,
Yeah.
So this is not the average of the average funding. So what we do is we take total district funding, including transportation for the foundation school program. So
Right.
all
So
in
the
FSP.
district side includes transportation.
Yes, sir. So
And
you
then-
take total district funding and then divide it by total district students.
So to the chairman's point, like I know in my city, and I'm not picking on the charter schools, but I don't know that one offers transportation at all, right? And so part of their average includes the dollar amount that the districts get to provide transportation, and it's included in the graph, right? I'm asking.
No, the charter schools are funded on a state average adjusted allotment, which is the input to Tier 1. And so charters have their own transportation allotment apart from that, and transportation's not included in the adjusted allotment.
Yeah, no,
So there's no
So
double-
I think the point I'm trying to make is that it's not just how much they get, but it's also I think there's a way to look at expenditures at the same time. Is the point I'm trying to make.
Agreed, but again, I think you missed my other point, which is that the amount that they're getting relative to San Antonio with the 1882 bill, they got $650 more than the charter would down the street, right? I mean, that's what you're saying. The charter would have gotten X versus what they're getting today. The difference is the charter's not getting the INS.
I'm saying the only statement I'm making is for a campus of 400 kids, when on their own they were getting X amount. When they did the partnership, it was X amount plus 650,000 per year. That's the point I was trying to make. I'm just saying it works differently across the state. It looks differently across the state. In another part of the state, it might have been a negative amount, and they had to make a different adjustment.
Well,
in that part, it was.
Yeah, I mean, but okay, but
And I'm wondering about the expenditures. This is curiosity, Chairman.
Yeah, no, I get it, but I think it's a different issue because you're dealing with 1882 and your options of taking us over and closing you, or we're going to give you more money to fix it.
I'm into it.
Yeah.
That school needed it. I'm excited about it. I'm using it as a demonstrative of the difference one year to the next, and what that looks like.
But again, they were also getting that school. Correct me if I'm wrong. That school was also getting INS money, whereas the school that would be down the street. If you're trying to make an analysis to the charter school that's down the street, and they became a charter school, and so they're getting the same amount of money today, it's not true, because they're not getting the same amount of money because this traditional school was getting that additional money plus INS, whereas the charter is not.
Well, I don't know if they're getting INS or not.
Every school, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, whatever your INS rate is. What's San
and
Antonio's INS rate?
And the point I'm trying to make is that I think the point I'm trying to make
24 cents. They're getting 24 cents an
the
INS.
point I'm trying to make is I think expenditures is also an important part of the conversation, right? So there are some districts that offer transportation. Charter schools in my city don't. I just think that's an important part of the evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I think that when we say special ed, they're not all the same, right? You can have a bunch of special ed kids, and it's kids with certain kinds of challenges, and other special ed kids, and those challenges are much more severe and challenging, and they're not the same. They're going to show up the same on a graph like this, but in real life they're not. That's what I'm asking about. That's all, Chairman. Thank you.
Keep going.
we can go over through the appendix, or
Or if there are any more questions, we'd be happy to answer those questions. If you'd like us to go through the appendix, we can.
Can you hit slide 24 real quick?
okay. So, school districts right now. So, there's a minimum salary schedule in Texas for educators, and the state pays what's called TRS on behalf, and so the state pays that 6.8% state contribution on the district's behalf, and they pay that into the TRS pension. Now, school districts are required to pay any portion above the salary, above the minimum for the salaries that are above the minimum. So if the minimum salary for a teacher at a given year experience is, say, $40,000, and they're paying that teacher $45,000, the state will pay that 6.8% up to the $40,000, and then the district has to pay the 6.8% above the minimum. Charter schools, because they are not subject to the minimum salary schedule, there is no differentiation between that, and so the state pays 100% of the contributions on the 100% of the charter school salary, and that's essentially the gist of that slide. So that's how districts go.
So, go ahead, Chairman.
Well, I was going to ask, so that means you treat charter school salaries differently than they are in the traditional public school. So the incentive in the public school, I mean, looking at it as an incentive, or disincentive, I guess, would be sort of a cap on salaries because of what the locals would have to pay versus what the state pays. But in the charter schools, you don't have that difference.
So, I mean, to the extent that a district has to make budgetary considerations, I mean, they do when they're deciding whether or not to, say, pass a pay increase.
Yeah.
You know, they have to look at the budget, obviously. I don't know that that 6.8%, the difference factors in all that much. I mean, it is a little extra cost, but I don't know that a district would necessarily, that would be the deciding factor.
Yeah. Do we know now how much that is now?
For school districts?
Yeah, the difference between what the school district would be required to pay versus what the state pays.
I don't have that exact amount. I off the top of my head, I can get it for you and get it back for the committee.
Can you? Okay, because that would be interesting because, again, that treats charter schools differently than we treat traditional public schools, and I think that's the point the vice chair was making.
Sure, we can get that for you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Let me ask you to provide something else to us. So we've had, there's been conversations and comments made about, teacher pay, incentive pay, across the board pay, all kinds of different things.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that we looked at or we'd like to know, at least I would like to know, and I know this is dealing with, we're talking about charters, but it deals with the minimum salary schedule, is that, if I'm not telling you to pick a number, but there's numbers that are out there that people have, that have been thrown about of, what should those numbers be from an across the board. And I don't think, this committee needs to get to work and figure out what our recommendation will be specifically related to that. But let's just say that it was, whether it's 1,000 or 5,000 or 10, whatever it is across the board, that increase to the minimum salary schedule actually impacts the TRS contribution. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And creates a situation where it would shore up TRS's pension, which is right now, because they reduced it down to 7.25%, I think is what they did, is what their number is this year.
Oh, I'm not in
The pension.
advised.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think they did. They went down to 7.25%. Yeah, rate of return, they're estimated at 7.25%. But if you did that, so if there was some piece of legislation that were out there that had, some parameters of, if you went from 1,000, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, on if, everybody getting a pay raise, right? That's going to increase the state's share in cost as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'd like you to tell us what that would be.
Okay.
Please. And you guys are going through the funding allotment. When are you going to make that? The rule schedule will be finalized September of 18.
So I think that's an old slide from
Okay.
August. So that's already been, that should have been pulled out. My apologies.
Okay.
That's been already done, and the districts are, the charter schools are already receiving funding.
Okay. How many got it?
You
How
know,
much did they get per? Is it the 220 per student?
It's about 200 or so. I think 202.
And they have to reapply and get that money on a go-forward basis, or they're always going to get it now?
So there's no application. So what we do is in August. So like this past August, we looked at the ratings for the school year 17-18 school year, and then pending any changes regarding appeals that happened during the fall, we use those ratings to flow the funding for the 18-19 school year. And then so this coming August, when we get the academic ratings for 18-19, we will then use that to flow the funds automatically for the 19-20 school year.
Okay.
So they don't need to apply.
So absent of, so let's say the 4 charters that are the new ones, and then you've got other ones that are out there, right,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe become eligible now, right? So unless there's a new appropriation, when statutorily it's 60 million that's in there right now, unless there's a new appropriation, then theoretically it'd be like the NIFA funding, right? That we did last time, which we increased it to $1,000, and then more people applied, and instead of giving 250, we gave 235, right? So you could theoretically see that go down.
Yeah, so either if you have an increase in ADA, whether it's by more charters or more enrollment, you would have that multiplier decrease.
Understand that? That's a problem. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Was there?
You done?
We're done.
All right. Okay. Ryan Franklin, Associate Commissioner of Education, Leadership, and Quality. Heather, make sure you just go sign in that thing for us. Thank you. Good to see you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Ryan Franklin. I'm the Associate Commissioner for Educator Leadership and Quality at TEA, and I was asked to give a brief high-level overview of educator preparation and certification. Our team works on all aspects of educator licensure, from preparation, educator testing, certification, all the way through investigations for professional misconduct and the sanctioning of educators on that side, but I'll focus today on preparation and certification. This is part of Commissioner Morath's Strategic Priority 1 that he referenced earlier today, and as we know, teachers are the most important in-school factor for improving student outcomes, so I think our work is important and critical to that work. On slide 4, try to capture a little bit of the rather unique rulemaking administrative structure for our work. The State Board for Educator Certification is the board that is charged with policy making across educator preparation and certification. Their rules are subject to review by the State Board of Education, and then the staff at TEA are the staff that implement those rules. So it's a little bit unique with a lot of different policymakers kind of at the table as those deliberations are ongoing. To receive a standard certification in the state, for most things other than a handful of career and technical education fields, you need a bachelor's degree, you need to complete an educator preparation program, and then there are 2 basic exams that apply across certification areas. One is the Pedagogy and Professional Responsibilities exam. That is a content agnostic early childhood through grade 12 exam regarding how to teach at a high level and basic professional responsibilities of educators. And then there is a content certification exam. So this would be if you want to be a high school math teacher, this is your math 7 through 12 exam. And so those are the basic certification requirements. There are some nuances across other areas, but those are the basics. So leading to taking that certification exam and receiving full certification, you complete an educator preparation program. And there are 132 different entities preparing teachers in this state, and among those they have 267 different programs. And the reason for that number being different is you might have an institution of higher education offering a traditional 4-year undergraduate program, an alternative certification program, and then a post-baccalaureate preparation program. So you might have one higher ed entity with 3 different program models under their roof. As I move to slide 7, the primary differences across the program models are the timing of when the training occurs in relation to the educator receiving full certification and becoming the teacher of record. So there is a late hire alternative certification model that doesn't require any training before stepping in the classroom as a teacher of record. And with that model and with our other alternative certification program model, those do require passing the content certification exam before becoming a teacher of record, and then the bulk of the training occurs while you are in the preparation program. With our traditional undergraduate preparation program, it's more what we think of in terms of clinical teaching over the course of a semester, and then you take your certification exams at the end of that process. So ultimately, at the end of the game, before receiving standard certification, you complete the same number of training hours. It's just the point at which you are turned loose as the teacher of record in the classroom in relation to that training. On slide 8, kind of some context around where new teachers are being prepared. Only around a third of our new teachers are trained in traditional undergraduate preparation programs. We've been right around 50%, give or take a little every year, in our alternative certification programs. And there's a wide gamut of alternative certification programs from our education service centers. Many of them offer teacher preparation programs to some nonprofit and for-profit models for alternative certification programs.
Good.
Go ahead, Chairman.
Why is that the case?
Why are more people going through
The alternative
certification route?
than the traditional. Why does that happen?
I think there's a lot of factors. I think one factor that we've seen that have been working with some different ways to address is we see a lot of candidates who have a desire to be teacher while they're in their undergraduate and they're earning their degree, but they feel like they can't take the semester off from whatever part-time job they're using to help pay their way through school. And so they just graduate and then many times will go straight into an alternative certification program because they can be paid while they are receiving their certification. So that's one factor.
Is there any incentive to doing it that way? That's built into what we do?
I don't think the structures here do that. One of the changes we've recently made is made it where someone who's working as a paraprofessional and educational aide can count their experience as that to substitute for that clinical teaching to help expedite and smooth that out. That's one of the sort of barriers that we had in prior rules that we've tried to address.
And so that when you deal with that, that takes away the incentive to do the alternative certification.
That gives them a route to receive their bachelor's while as a working professional as a educational aide.
So do you actually approve the programs at the colleges and universities?
Yes, sir. The SPEC approves them to offer the certifications they offer.
And then, in addition to improving the program, you end up certifying and not certifying the teachers from that program.
Yes, sir. They still, regardless of which route you take, you still, at the end of the day, have to complete the same certification exams.
Okay. Do you know, I guess, for each school, you would know how many graduates they have versus how many certifications they have?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And likewise, how about the campuses at the schools, in the various school districts? Would you know, for example, how many certified teachers are at a particular campus?
Yes, sir.
You would?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are there campuses where they don't have certified teachers?
There are campuses all over the state where they don't have certified teachers. And in the District of Innovation, one of the things about that is that's one of the options for districts to waive as a requirement, is the requirement to have certified teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. So one of the factors that we look at and talk about a lot is teacher retention. And as we look at it across the state, for staying in the profession 5 years after being certified, our average is about 70% of teachers stay in for 5 years. We could track it further, but typically we track 5 years out by program route. We see our traditional undergrad program route little over 76%. Our alternative rate 5 years after certification is about 64%. Our out-of-state rate is the lowest, but very often these are our military families that are here for whatever the period of deployment is, and then they move on.
Can you break it out for us, like relative to whether they have moved or something like that, or do you not get any type of information when they leave to follow them?
We don't have any exit sort of date at the state level as
So
to why
if their
someone
contract's
leaves.
not renewed, it could be because they decided not to renew it, versus for whatever reason.
Sure.
But they could have moved, or just said I'm done, or whatever it is. But this is year 1 to 5, right?
Right.
Okay. And so that's interesting.
As we look at where our least experienced teachers are, and this is slide 10, we know that our least experienced teachers are teaching on campuses with higher number of economically disadvantaged students and higher numbers of students of color. And so we see this both in terms of the blue bar there is our teachers in the alternative certification program on their intern or probationary certificate. The orange bar is after they've received their standard certification in the first 3 years. And then the gray bar is sort of everyone else who's stayed in the profession for 4 years or more.
Chairman Dutton has a comment.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Have you given any thought to why this is like that?
I think to get a job on an intern certificate with an alternative certification, it requires a relationship between the district and the preparation program, and very frequently these are our most difficult to staff campuses, and these districts are reaching out to the alternative certification program saying, do you have anybody you can get in here on this intern certificate to start teaching tomorrow or whenever it is? And so I think those are frequently some of the hardest to staff campuses, and the least experienced folks, that's where they gravitate there. Yes, sir.
And that's why I've always said that in the business world, one of the things we always did was we sent our best people to our worst problem. And what this does is send the worst people, generally, to our worst problem, which means you don't get it cured.
Right. Less experienced people.
Yeah, I don't mean worse. I mean worse by experience.
Less experienced.
Okay, I'll use your words. And I wonder, is there anything you would suggest that this committee could do to change that paradigm?
Yes, I think we've seen a lot of models popping up around the state where they are providing a number of financial and other sort of leadership opportunities and incentives from some of their strongest teachers to move into struggling campuses. And so I think we've seen some program models like that around the state.
Let me just jump in, Chairman Dutton. We one of the things in the School Finance Commission we did is that we had incentive pay, but we also changed our percentage of comp ed and ELL weights and things of that nature, so that more resources would go to those campuses, not the district, to the campus, so that then they can hire the best people. So, for example, in Dallas, they have what they call their ACE program. And so they're basically saying exactly what you said. Look, we've got a problem. And they went from 43 IR campuses to 3 by doing this.
Yeah.
And they basically said, hey, we're going to, we want you. You're the best teacher. You've been here 15 years. We're going to give you 10 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand to go work in this campus and to fix this problem. And so that's really part of the incentive program that we have. And I know we're going to have to deal with this, but, when we hear, we want to make sure that the resources are there for those teachers, but we've got to get them into the right places.
Right.
And so those are some of the discussions that we're going to have of how do we pay for that as we go forward, versus just,
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, because that's the campus that's been the longest low-performing high school in the state of Texas. It happens to be in my district, Cashmere High School, which has been IR for 9 consecutive school years. And when I looked at why they were low-performing, it jumped out at me that they didn't do well on the math portion of the standardized test. And so I went a little further to look at, well, who was teaching math to these students? And I went back all the way to their 6th grade all the way from 6th grade to 12th grade, and they never had a certified math teacher. And I thought, well, wait a minute. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the students. It's just the fact that we didn't start by putting a quality teacher in that classroom. And as a consequence, you get 9 consecutive years of IR.
And I think that goes to some of the comments certainly the speaker has made recently about, let us work through this process, but specifically related to our teachers is that, create the opportunity to give the money to those campuses and to the districts and let them create their programs as we go forward. So as I said earlier today, that next week, we'll be having a full briefing through members of the commission even though Diego and I were on there, to have them come and do the presentation, talk through all of these items, because I think you'll find it to be very interesting. And the proof's in the pudding, right? Relative to how Dallas is done. I mean, it works. It's not that it doesn't work. It works, but it's expensive, and we got to be willing to pay for it. So, yes, sir.
This made me think of, and I'm not picking on him. I'm just asking. It's pure curiosity.
Yes, you are.
Caveat. No, I'm really not. But Teach for America, right? What's the requirement to place a TFA person there? Is it just like a lot of my districts don't have enough people, and so they fill that gap? But it's not a marrying of a school that has a certain profile and a teacher. It's just districts need teachers, and we fill it, right? There's nothing more than that. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. Teach for America in Texas is not its own program. It's part of educator preparation programs across the state. They have their own training sort of layered on top of that, but I think it is based largely on whatever relationships there are with the local districts.
So it's independently negotiated then?
That's
right?
my sense.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Chairman.
Lily, Deputy School Programs, and this one. You've got to go. Okay, because I got to go. Well, Tallarico was a Teach for America person, so he could probably go take him out for a drink. He'll tell you all about it. So. I want to go back to one little thing, and then I think we're done with you, which is I want to go back to SBEC. And maybe this is a Vaughn question or somebody else that knows the history here, but I read the second thing of this. State Board of Certified, has rulemaking authority for the preparation, testing, certification, professional conduct. It says the State Board of Education will reject but not modify the SBEC rules. That was changed a while ago, is my understanding. Why does if we've got SBEC that's doing all this work and going through this process, and then why do we have another layer that's in between here? Help me understand that.
I will take a stab historically. So there was a time many years ago where the SBOE was the rulemaking body, and then SBEC was pulled out and made its own standalone agency. In, I believe, 2005, 2006 timeframe, SBEC was folded back. But while they were independent, they still were tied in with SBOE having review and oversight over their rule process. When they came back sort of under the TEA umbrella and not as a separate agency, that sort of remnant of that old structure was left in place. I think at the time it was sort of an oversight or a extra way to make sure SBEC didn't get too far out of line, but it definitely adds a lot of time to the rulemaking process and extra kind of steps in the process there.
Should they be going through approval with SBOE, or we're the ones that create the laws and the statutory guidelines and give them the rulemaking authority. I always question that.
I think can't speak to intent, but I think at the time it was sort of elected versus appointed consideration as a major factor in that at the time. But there are lots of other appointed entities.
We're the oversight, right?
Yes, sir.
The legislature's the oversight. I'm just curious about that. And
yes, sir.
Why we're having that? Well, we want to think about that and work on that. So, okay. Anything else for Ryan?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Lily Locks, Deputy Commissioner of School Programs. Hey, Lily.
Hello. Good afternoon, Chair, Committee. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Deputy Commissioner of School Programs, Lily Locks, and I'm excited to have an opportunity to speak with you this afternoon about a couple of initiatives that have occurred as a result of legislation last session that particularly relate to our third strategic priority, connecting high school to college and career. Sorry, I'm a little tall for this. Great. So first I want to start by framing some of this and how we're thinking about connecting high school to college and career. So on slide 2, you see a graphic that gets at how we're thinking about aligning Texas's educational goals with its diverse industry needs and opportunities. So for lack of a better term here, you see a braiding of academic learning and relevant work experience. So thinking about how we can make sure that that coordination between business and industry, post-secondary and secondary is happening in a meaningful way so students have multiple entry and exit points and choices throughout their trajectory. I also want to note throughout this that in both of the initiatives I'm highlighting today, we've been working closely with our partners at the Higher Ed Coordinating Board and with the Workforce Commission, so our tri-agency partners. I'm going to go ahead and start with career and technical education. So there's 2 initiatives here that I want to highlight. And one is one that's very familiar to this group that comes out of HB 22 and the inclusion of industry certifications in the accountability system. On slide 4, you see a list of criteria for the inclusion of industry-based certifications on the list that counts for HB 22. This list was developed to ensure that the certifications that are included are truly valued by industry. So you see the industry recognized and industry valued are the first 2 criteria. And the other criteria that you see here are ones that we believe are important for students to be able to take that credential and get a meaningful opportunity in the workplace in multiple places in the state. On slide 5, I want to quickly recap what this process has looked like over the last couple of years. In the summer of 2017, the agency published the first list of industry-based certifications for accountability, and this list included 73 certifications. This initial list was created with input from districts and input from employers, but we did receive substantial feedback from the field, both that they felt we could have taken more input and that they didn't feel like the process was as transparent as it could have been. Immediately following the publication of that list, we set about to create a new process that we felt would meet those requirements and would be easily replicable in future years. One of the things that we want to ensure is true about this list is that we're looking at updating it every 2 years to make sure that it truly aligns with Texas's economic need and those quick changing needs of industry and business partners. So in March of 2018, we started with our school districts. We sent a survey out to school districts and we asked them to send us all of the industry-based certifications that they would like considered for this. I'm sure it will not shock folks that we received over 4,000 responses to this initial inquiry. From there, our team went through and looked at each of those responses to determine how many of those were unique certifications. So certainly there were plenty of duplicates within that suggestion. As they went through this, you can imagine we saw recommendations from the field for everything from martial art black belt to completing a chapter of a module in a textbook. So there was a lot of effort that our team went through to determine what should this list be, being careful not to cull it down at this point. So we, again, didn't want to be the entity that said industry and business value this. We instead wanted to make sure that we put that full list back out to our workforce partners so that they were able to tell us what is truly industry valued and would help a student get a career and get an interview. That list, we then worked with our tri-agency partners and particularly the Texas Workforce Investment Council to mirror a project that they had started to use along similar lines to get that list out to the 28 workforce boards across the state. We had the workforce boards then weigh in on which of those credentials were truly valued by industry. From there, we then took the rest of the list and ran it through the criteria that's back on slide 4. What we now have, which went out a few weeks ago, so in January of this year, we have published a list that has now tripled in size from the original 73. There are currently 221 industry-based certifications on a list that we've put out for preliminary public comment. I want to emphasize that this preliminary public comment is not required in this process, but we wanted to use this opportunity as another chance to get feedback from districts, industry partners, and folks about, do we really have the right evidence and are these the right things on the list? So that is still open. As you see on slide 6, we are still accepting feedback. We are still accepting additional evidence from the field. And as of Monday, we had 817 responses so far to this particular comment period, which will last through February 13th, if you have folks who are still interested in weighing in on that list. From the conversations we've had and the evidence that we've already received, we feel confident that there will be additional revisions and likely additional additions to the list in terms of what industry-based certifications make the final list. Once we've had a chance to go through all of that, the list will again go back through rulemaking before it goes into effect. And it's scheduled to go into effect for the 1920 school year and will apply to school accountability ratings in August of 2021. So the next important thing here is how are we actually supporting school districts then in offering these industry-based certifications and making sure that their students have access if they haven't previously. On the next slide, you see our efforts. We've recently released Perkins Reserve grants designed to do exactly that. There are 2 focus areas for these Perkins Reserve grants. The first focus area is around helping a regional group. So in this case, LEAs, ESCs are also an acceptable fiscal agent, post-secondary, and workforce partners determine what is the regional need that they have and set a program up that meets that regional need. That's the one on the left, the focus area 1. In Focus Area 2, we are putting out grants so that districts both can pay for students' industry certifications and so that districts can have their teachers or whoever else at the district be able to be those providers of the actual tests. So we've heard a great need from districts that there is some expense in getting students access to these certifications, and we're hopeful that the just over $8 million between these 2 grant opportunities will allow districts some chance to make those programmatic changes.
Just out of curiosity, Perkins Reserve grants, where's that come from?
Perkins Reserve grants comes from our federal Perkins dollars.
And how much is that every year?
The formula award or the state portion?
State portion.
I'm going to look back to my team and double check. Great. Yeah, we get about 35 out of 110 million.
Okay.
And much of that, again, goes out through formula.
Understand.
Great. Great. One of the other things I just want to highlight quickly about those regional partnership pieces is, again, that we're hoping this allows those grantees to truly ensure that they're having alignment between these different sectors, that they're ensuring students get credentials and degrees with value in their labor market, and that they're creating cross-sector partnerships and work-based learning experiences. Right. Next, I want to change topics to a separate initiative, but one that's already come up today that's equally as important in connecting high school to college and career, and these are our college and career readiness school models. So as you heard earlier today, our college and career readiness school models have key components which are designed to provide equitable access to dual credit and post-secondary credential attainment. These models, importantly, are all at no cost to the student and have, as you heard in the commissioner's presentation and may have seen in the annual report, currently 73% of high school students who are attaining associate's degrees in high school in Texas are doing so within one of these models. There are 4 of them that I'm going to talk about briefly today. So there's the early college high school, which is the oldest of the 4 models. Excuse me. Our T-STEM academies, our industry cluster innovative academies, and our pathways in technology early college high school, which are our newest model from last session. The differences in the models is slight, but all of them focus on this, ensuring that there's dual credit at no cost to the student, there's rigorous instruction and accelerated courses, academic and social supports to ensure that students succeed, and increased college readiness. In the PTech, the Industry Cluster Innovate Academies, and the T-STEM models, there also is this crucial component of alignment to workforce, so ensuring, again, there are meaningful work-based learning experiences, and there's a few additional pieces with PTech I'll get into in a minute. On slide 9, quickly, you see the funding related to those models. So you see the riders for T-STEM, early college, and pathways in technology, early college, high school.
So to be clear, I'm looking at this. This shows about $14 million roughly of CCRSM funding, right?
Exactly.
Is that all the funding?
That's all of it.
Okay, and so School Finance Commission recommended that we spend $400 million, right?
I think we have many districts who would be very excited about that.
Right, and really, we're not even close to hitting our 60 by 30 goal.
No, I think as you saw in the commissioner's presentation, we have quite a ways to go.
Yeah, all right, go ahead.
Right. So within that, if you go to slide 11, you'll also see a snapshot. This is actually from our 2017 annual report, but of the growth in these models over time. And you'll notice that they started to grow a little bit more slowly, and then there was a rapid expansion starting after 2014. So in the 2014-2015 school year, 42 new early college high schools opened in the state. The following year, another 38, and we get the growth that we see today. One of the challenges with that growth was, even though we saw the model expanding and going out to more and more places in the state, what we didn't see was a change in the blueprint that was actually guiding how districts thought about setting up one of these models. Those blueprints were largely compliance-based, and they were focused on inputs, particularly in narrative form, so districts would describe those inputs, and they remained focused on it as a new academic model, even though the early college high school was no longer new. We also received a lot of feedback from the field with those blueprints that some of the requirements were onerous. They didn't sufficiently acknowledge differences in regional and local needs, and they didn't allow districts to get the support they needed to successfully execute those models. So the growth in those models really necessitated further differentiated guidance and support. So what you see on slide 12 is something that started the rollout in the summer of 2017 and that we've continued. So we have revamped all of our blueprints for these models, and in the case of P-TECH, created a new blueprint in conjunction with the Pathways and Technology Early College Advisory Council. Each of these blueprints now focuses on a series of outcomes that define the model. And there are quite a few benefits to this way of looking at it. In one, it allows a lot more flexibility for our districts to figure out how to best make sure that their version of the model is meeting those outcomes while being responsive to their local context. We're also seeing that ability to have clearly defined goals and help districts and schools manage towards them allows us to better support those districts and with technical assistance. So again, we saw that extreme growth in the number of models across the state without an extreme increase in funding. So as we think about supporting those districts strategically, we're now able to do so by looking carefully at what some of those outputs and areas for growth in each of those schools are. So on slide 13, you then see that this approach is one that we have started, but is certainly not one that we have completed. So we are taking a phased-in approach to implementing these outcomes-based blueprints across the state. We're allowing each district, so districts actually could choose to opt immediately into the whole full school, or they could say, we want to start with our 9th grade cohort in any instance, and then phase in the outcomes over that 4-year period. As they're doing that, we do anticipate that some of the outcome measures in the blueprints will shift. One of the other improvements that we've seen to our ability to analyze and support these models is around the actual data that we have regarding them. So previously, we were only able to truly analyze some of the school-wide data for each of these models, and we now have a PEAMS indicator that allows us to get a better snapshot of school within a school, early college, P-TECH, and so on. The other big change that was made during this process came from recommendations of studying the early colleges across the state, and you see that on slide 14. One of the things that we are now asking that any school that's interested in becoming a new early college do is go through a full planning year. We found that the difference between schools that went through a planning year that allowed them to meaningfully sequence courses and build partnerships and ensure curriculum alignment was quite different than those that didn't have that planning year. So now districts who are looking to open one of these schools get technical assistance throughout that entire year before they officially open their doors as one of these models. Great. Okay. On slide 15, you'll see that we are continuing to see quite a bit of growth. So you'll see the planning designees that are set for this year. And you'll see that we had quite a lot of interest in P-TECH and Industry Cluster Innovative Academy right off the bat. even though the Pathways in Technology Early College High School model is new, there were districts across the state who had already taken the initiative to start implementing a school with a similar model before that legislation passed. Dallas ISD is a strong example of this, where they had already worked to create P-TECH schools really at scale before this happened. I did want to just spend a little bit more time on P-TECH, given how new it is, and to highlight some of those differences with the model. So on page 16, slide 16, what you're seeing there are the details related specifically to P-TECH. The two that I really want to call out are around the work-based learning experiences, and then the particular importance of that internship for a student in the P-TECH model. So they have up to 6 years to pursue this opportunity, and in the commitment from the business partner, these students are then offered an ability to interview with that company upon graduation. So this is an exciting opportunity that ensures that those students really are having meaningful engagement with the business partners who have signed on. What you have on the next couple of slides on 17 and 18 are a couple of examples of what this looks like in action, and I have quite a few more if folks are interested, and there's a little bit more in the appendix. We've seen districts across the state who are taking this quite seriously. They are talking to their local business and industry partners. They are looking at, what does my regional economy need? What are real opportunities for my students? And how can I make sure that that's built into a program? So in this example in Richardson, you'll see that they have a biotechnology and life sciences program with actual clinical rotations and an opportunity to earn multiple certifications that are on that industry-based certification list that I started with. In Roscoe ISD, which is a rural community, we've seen them go above and beyond in terms of identifying what could constitute a business partner and how they would ensure that their students are prepared for success in a rural economy. So you see here they have a drone program and a vet program, both of which are quite interesting if there are more questions or desire. So finally, I just want to note that with P-TECH in particular, we still have a grant opportunity from last session. So with it, we are now in the second cycle of this grant, and there are both planning and success grants available for districts across the state. And we are expecting the second round of our success grants to launch in February. Take questions. Thank you.
All right, members, any questions? Going once, going twice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have Justin Porter. Justin.
Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Justin Porter, State Director for Special Education, and thank you all for hanging in there. My task today is to update you all a little bit on where we're going with special education in Texas, and talk briefly about any questions y'all might have regarding implementation of the corrective action response or the strategic plan for special education for the state of Texas. I believe you have the deck in front of you. Some of these graphs will not be news. There will be things that you've seen before, but I'm happy to talk through any updates that are on there. The first slide indicates enrollment trends in special education, and you can see that over the last couple of years we have seen an upward trajectory in identification of students with disabilities in Texas public schools. We currently have 2017-2018 is the latest hard data that we have, and the state of Texas has 498,588 students, or 9.23% of the student population identified as a student with a disability receiving services in special ed. And that's up significantly over the last several years. It was 16-17 was 477, 526, and 15-16 was 463, 238. So it's going up every single year. To sort of set the stage for why, in addition to compliance concerns that we have from the federal government, there are definitely some performance gaps that we're trying to address with their students with disabilities through the strategic plan. If you look on slide 3, the 4-year graduation rates, our students with disabilities and served in special education are performing significantly lower than their non-disabled peers with regard to graduation. That continues on the next slide. You can see the STAR results for students who met grade level, and remember that is with our new performance level descriptors on STAR, that is not the approaching, that's meets. So at that level, which is actually at where the committees decided grade level proficiency was on those tests. And then again, in college and career readiness, a large gap you can see there as well. Any questions about the data?
All right.
We really should be expecting our students with disabilities, the vast majority of kids with disabilities should be performing on level with their grade level peers. There's not really a good reason for that to not be happening when they're provided with the benefit of high expectations and quality instruction. They should be right there with their peers. Jumping right along, slide number 7. The strategic plan, which this committee has seen in discussions before, is basically broken into 5 different areas. State monitoring, identification, evaluation, and placement, training support and development, student, family, and community engagement, and then networks and structures. We're going to break each one of those down just a little bit as we go forward through here. Moving on to slide 8. Strategic plan monitoring. This has been a very large lift at TEA to expand the team by roughly 50 FTEs. So that hiring has happened and those people are on board and working now towards implementing our new monitoring program. Those FTEs are all paid for with IDEA discretionary funds. The system that group is standing up is much less focused on rote compliance and box checking as it is improving outcomes for kids. So working with districts to be sure, obviously, that they are in compliance with federal and state requirements around special education, but more so partnering with them to move forward in implementing evidence-based practices that will improve outcomes for students with disabilities, connecting them to various pieces of technical assistance that are available throughout the strategic plan and then its implementation across the state.
Okay.
Slide number 9. Strategic plan identification, evaluation, placement, child find and FAPE. These are basically, this was the area that the federal government found TEA's practices or the state's practices to be most lacking in, and so you'll see quite a bit of emphasis there throughout the strategic plan. We are requiring LEAs to notify parents of available programs for students who might be struggling. In addition to that, the districts, the LEAs have been asked to tailor that communication to the students, the families of students that they think would most benefit from that. An outreach campaign, we are in the final process of awarding a contract for an outreach campaign that will be a large statewide effort to educate parents across the state about what their rights are and what special education is intended to do. We anticipate that work starting sometime over the summer with this newly identified contractor. Improving guidance and training. So we are updating technical assistance and guidance for school districts as it relates to child find and FAPE. So they're really clear what their requirements are and what best practice in those areas are. We're aligning all of our resources to support that work. And also providing some clarity on general information about response to intervention programs. Section 504 in dyslexia, that has been an area in the state for which we've heard for quite some time from LEAs that they're experiencing some significant confusion around that, and it was absolutely pointed out by the federal government in their letter of findings that they gave to us last January. So providing clarity around those 3 areas and how they interplay is definitely a focus going forward. In addition, enhancing training for parents around the complaints process, trying to make our complaints process much more transparent and much more accessible to folks. More than that, we really want to build out resources around assisting LEAs to work with parents proactively to avoid the need for those complaints. If we're able to handle disputes at the lowest level possible, that preserves the relationship between the parents and the LEA and actually is much more constructive going forward for everyone. But we do see the need for the complaints process to be much more accessible to parents at the same time. Moving along, identification, evaluation, and placement. So this is along the same theme. One grant that has already been awarded was to Region 20 in San Antonio to provide a system by which LEAs who are experiencing an influx or a surge in requests for evaluations are able to still meet their timelines by employing contracted services through various evaluation personnel companies or individuals. So what Region 20 has done for us is negotiated statewide pricing with some of these folks and are able to connect them directly with the LEAs who are experiencing that surge in requests for evaluations. And then through that process, the LEA, once they work with one of these contractors, can apply back to Region 20 for proportional reimbursement of some of those costs. And so it's not possible with the money available to completely foot the bill for that, but they are receiving a significant reimbursement for a portion of those costs going forward. Training, support, and development. Throughout the strategic plan, there's a large emphasis on professional development. One of the things that we really want to focus on is the second half of the slide here. We're really working with general educators as it relates to special ed. The vast majority of our students with disabilities spend 80 to 85% of their time in a general ed setting, and so it's really key that those general educators have the skill set they need to meet the needs of students with disabilities and help them to access a curriculum at the level that their non-disabled peers do. Yes, sir.
Representative Bernal has
Just
a
real quick,
question.
Yes, sir.
so that's interesting. Are you saying that the goal for the training is to touch every teacher? So it's every educator per campus attempt?
So yes, that is the ultimate goal. Initially, of course, we're going to start small. We are smaller with around 100,000 educators in the first 2 years. Mm-hmm. We anticipate the focus of that to the first year be on decision makers. So if you've ever experienced, been through an ARD meeting or worked with a school around this process, one of the folks on the campus who has the most sway and most power with that is actually assistant principals, are very often the folks who are in those ARD committee meetings and guiding them and helping them make those decisions. And so those folks to have varying degrees of expertise in special ed, and so that'll be one of the first groups that we touch, and then moving on to other general educators and also classroom teachers.
And as you roll out and scale up, are the resources, the funds already set aside and spoken for, or is that going to be something that we need to keep track of as we?
So we have set aside funds from our IDOE discretionary to roll this out through the next 5 years, and beyond that, then we'd have to have another discussion around funding.
Thank you.
For
Thank
sure.
you, Chair.
Moving along, I think we're on slide 12 now. Training, support, and development. Resource development. So we are currently working in the selection process to identify a contractor to build out some resources for LEAs around RTI dyslexia section 504 and how they interplay with special education. Those will be some robust training modules and other resources to help make all of that much more clear, not only to LEAs but also to parents and families and other stakeholders. So definitely some important work to do there. The State Board of Education has revised and updated the dyslexia handbook. And so in addition to just providing that handbook through the general education program, we in special ed will be providing specific training opportunities for LEAs around how to implement the requirements of the handbook in the context of special education and where that line might be drawn between general ed and special ed as it relates to dyslexia. Next slide. Certification, governance, and statewide partnerships. So we are currently working with Ryan's group in the certification area around increasing the importance placed on special education as well as other special populations in the certification exams for all teachers. As I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of our kids spend 80 to 85% of their time in general ed settings, and therefore those teachers coming into the profession really need to have a skill set that helps them address the needs of students with disabilities, whether or not they're specifically certified for special ed. and also as it relates not just to special education, but services for other students with disabilities such as dyslexia or anything that's being served through Section 504, just basic differentiation and accommodation of students with individual needs. We're continuing our work with school board training to improve local monitoring. School boards are critical in this process to have a deep understanding of what's expected of them with regard to special education and the implementation of a FAPE or free and appropriate public education for all of their students. And lastly, statewide partnerships. We're always looking for new opportunities to partner with other state agencies. We are currently working closely with Texas Workforce Commission on a transition program. We have worked really hard to help them facilitate this program through, it's called Charting the Course, through the educational service centers and making sure that the service centers have the resources from us that they need to help TWC implement this new program. It basically is around providing kids in grades 8 through 12 with opportunities to engage with professionals around career counseling and things like that, and transition planning as they move forward, looking at post-secondary for students with disabilities. Student, family, and community engagement. There's an awful lot going on here that's reflected in this slide. In addition to, we currently have a call center known as SpedTex, and spread the word around SpedTex if you can, spedtex.org. I'm trying to drive as many folks to that as possible. It's not only a call center, but also a website with resources. It's currently run through a grant with Region 10 in Richardson, and we're looking at enhancing that for the next grant cycle and providing additional levels of service through that existing framework. It's open for anyone to call and receive some guidance or information about special education, what the rights are, and also how to frame questions and enter into an ARD committee meeting with as much background as possible, as that's really what we need is for our parents to be able to feel empowered to advocate for the needs of their students at all levels. In addition, we're providing clarification, I keep coming back to this, but Section 504 dyslexia and RTI, providing resources for parents and stakeholders around this, as it has been something that has been lacked clarity in the past, as evidenced by the letter of findings and several other pieces of data. Information around the clear definition of eligibility and child find practices. So really, that goes back to the outreach campaign and several other resources that are being put out and produced for parents and families, so that they have a good understanding of what their rights are, and again can feel empowered to advocate for the needs of their students when they enter into the schoolhouse. And finally, probably it seems a little disingenuous to have all of these 10 networks on one slide, as this is probably the biggest lift in the entire strategic plan, is making these networks happen. There are previously were 16 different leadership networks across the state that provided support to LEAs with regard to various areas in special education. All of those networks cropped up over several years' time in response to a need, so they sort of popcorned up over years, 15 to 16 years, again, just in response to a need without really a cohesive, comprehensive look at the landscape across Texas and a needs assessment and trying to bring it all together. So that's what these 10 networks reflect through extensive stakeholder engagement. We've taken the work that the 16 previous networks were doing and refined it into 10 leadership networks. And we're in the process right now of awarding grants for the 1920 school year for different entities to lead these efforts for us. Happy to answer any questions, Chairman or committee members.
I have some, but I'll see if the rest of the committee has some first. No? Okay. Let's go back to page 2. Obviously, I know what happened in 2004 when they basically, TEA did the mandate on the 8.5%, right? So that caused the drop in the amount of the population. But prior to that, did we include 504 population in our analysis? And are you including, you're not including, as I understand it, you're not including the 504 population today?
So Section 504 is not part of IDEA. It's not part of special ed, so
right.
No, it's not.
Okay. So when you look at national average of special education enrollment, are they using SPED? Because there are some states that are including SPED and 504 kids on their percentages.
So they're not necessarily including 504 kids. They're probably including kids who in Texas might be 504 kids. So in their state, they're identifying them under IDEA as special ed, but they wouldn't necessarily be under 504. It's a little weird because sort of all kids in special ed are also protected by Section 504. So by definition, all kids in special ed are 504 kids as well. But so I think probably what you're alluding to is some other states have every single kid with dyslexia, identified with dyslexia, is automatically served in special ed. That's not the case in most states, but in some it is. Also, other states include students identified with giftedness in their special ed programs, and so there's different states have some latitude as to who they include in that group or not, to a certain extent.
So do you believe that causes the U.S. national average to be that much higher than what? I mean, the spread is significant if you look at it. I mean, it's significant. It's 4 to 5 percentage points.
Yes, sir. And if we were to look state by state, you would see there are definitely some outliers on both ends. Texas has been significantly lower than most other states for quite some time, but states like Massachusetts and some other places have 18 and 20% identification rates.
I'd like to see that and see what they're identifying in that relative to, and I'm sure you have that data.
Yep, we do.
Second question on page 3, 4-year graduation rates. You basically gave us 15 to 16, but the one comment during the past 10 years, gap in graduation widened from 10 to 12%. I would be curious if I would like to see the same information from 2000 to today. And what I mean by that is that when TEA required the percentage, the cap to be implemented, I'd like to see what the difference in graduation rates are from the implementation of that, so from 2000 forward.
Yes, sir.
Okay, on page 12, you talked about dyslexia. State Board of Education revised and updated this Texas Dyslexia Handbook, and additional training resources teacher on proper dyslexia practice will be provided. Does that mean you're providing that to us, or are we getting that, or when did that get revised? Who revised it? Help me understand that a little bit.
The state board owns the dyslexia handbook, and they went through a process starting over the summer last year, and they finally adopted it in November of this year, and so we can certainly provide you with that link.
I'd like to see that, please. What's the so they updated it for what? I mean, where was it? Significant overhauls to
It was yes, it was significant to what they've done in the past. It hadn't been really worked on since 2009 to much extent, and so it just required some cleanup as well as some significant changes there, and also to implement requirements from the previous legislative session around the dyslexia screener and things like that.
Okay, so we know that on dyslexia that I think the average in the state identified is 2.5%. Is that
somewhere
right?
close to that?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
National average is what?
I'll have to find that information for you.
It's in excess of 10. Would you agree with that?
I would have to find that information to be sure. Yeah.
Okay. So it is, but regardless of that, so is this book supposed to help them more identify those students, or until we actually pass the funding mechanism, we'll stay at the 2? What's your gut feeling on that? Is this handbook going to help them identify more students?
So I think the screener is going to help us find more kids earlier, which is obviously the intent of that and absolutely the best way to go. Yeah. I think the differential here is going to be the number of students that are actually identified for special education that previously weren't. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's going to be where we're going to see the biggest change in students with identified with dyslexia, is whether or not they're served only under Section 504 or under IDEA as well.
If you create a weight for them, you don't have to qualify them under IDA though, but you could still qualify them to get the funding associated with that.
Yes,
right?
sir.
Okay. Still get an ARD and everything else in IEP. Where are we at on our maintenance of effort? Anticipated for this year, we've had a problem over the last several years, and I know that we've had to write checks back to the Department of Education.
I have to defer that to Leo if he's still here.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so you can maybe answer this one. Where are we at on the the grants for the autism and the dyslexia that were passed in
House Bill 21?
Yeah.
So we are currently, I can speak to the autism grants because that's where I'm responsible. The dyslexia is being handled through Monica Martinez's shop in Standards and Support Services. We are planning to do our first round of visits in the month of February, so we're collecting data from all of those right now. Everyone was funded, and they're running, and we have been in contact with them regularly, so.
What was the parameters of award? I mean, it was all different, right? I mean, it just depended on how they structured their program to get the grants, correct?
Yeah. So the legislation really left it open, looking for innovation, and so that's exactly what we reflected in the grant requirements. And so we did. It was very open, looking for innovation with a few parameters around. They needed to be serving students with dyslexia. Or, I'm sorry, students with autism in a standalone program. And so there was quite a bit of flexibility given in how they define that standalone program. In some cases, it's a school within a school, or it could be a standalone campus as well.
Okay. And was there any, on specifically on the autism grant, was there any identification in any of those programs that were awarded in partnering with any private providers? Because that was one opportunity that was given to them, and I'm just curious if any of them took advantage of that.
So I couldn't speak specifically about which ones, but yes, there were several included that in their proposals. Yeah. Okay. And that'll be something we'll be looking for on our visits.
Yeah, and if you would, I know Monica's, I don't see her here, but I would like for an update on both of those. The amount, the grants for each were what, 10 apiece, 10 grants, 10 apiece, 10 million?
It was actually 20 million over 2 years, so 10
10
each.
10 each,
Yep.
10 each on each side, okay. I think we'd like an update on that because we'd like to that's something we're gonna have to reappropriate, right? Or did we statutorily put it in? I can't remember. I think it's a reappropriation. I think it's a reappropriation, isn't it? Yeah, it's a grant. Yeah, I think it is. Well, my point to you is I would like.
It could not be appropriated. It has to be sure that there's the line item.
I would like for you to come back to us and give us the parameters of how they're working, and the implementation thereof, and how they were used. Meaning if the money was used for, just specifically for, training and things of that nature, we would like to know that versus if it was used to actually put a program in place, so we know what that is. But that's something that we would like to know exactly how that's working.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can do that.
Can I have some questions?
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you so much for being here.
Microphone.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I turned it off.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir. There's a couple questions specifically about the corrective action plan. I know that one of the reasons we had to do that is because of the change in monitoring, or TEA made a commitment in the change in monitoring at local level. Can you talk about what the differences are from previously to now, and kind of how you're assessing the change of monitoring?
So our monitoring is going to be night and day from what it was previous to this implementation. However, I don't want to characterize it as it's already in place because we're developing it right now. So
Okay,
there's
so it's not in place?
It's not 100% in place until next school year. So there's a lot of work to do between now and then to get the new monitoring system up and running. And so it will begin with earnest over the summer of this year. And we can, actually, Jennifer Alexander is here, and she could talk to a little bit too if you wanted to talk to her. The monitoring system is going to be much more focused on improving outcomes for kids rather than just on rote compliance. So working with districts to identify, obviously, areas of noncompliance is something the monitoring system has to do. But beyond that, once we find those areas, looking at overall student outcomes and what they're producing with their program, and connecting the districts with the technical assistance available through the networks and anywhere else that we have within the system to help them improve their programming in general.
And I appreciate the focus on improving outcomes, because we know that once we are able to identify students early and have a successful ARD plan, then that we can get them to grade level. So I appreciate that. I guess my only question is, since you haven't implemented something until next year, the gap that exists currently, how are you making sure that
So there are monitoring activities going on this year, much similar to what's happened in the past with regard to the performance-based monitoring analysis system and the work that we've done in the past to identify districts through that process with whom we'll have to follow up.
Okay, and the other thing that I really appreciated in the corrective action plan is the level is a stakeholder engagement. I don't know if you know this, my little sister has Down syndrome, so the idea for families and communities to be able to be engaged in the process is really important. I wanted to get an outline of what that stakeholder engagement actually looks like, and what kind of meetings are you planning to have? What?
So we are in the very final stages of awarding a grant to an organization to support us logistically with stakeholder engagement. engagement. And one of the first things that they're going to be asked to do is to create a database and a recruiting platform for stakeholders across the state who are interested in providing feedback to TEA on various things within special education. So that it'll be basically a web-facing portal in which people can identify themselves, give us whatever information they want to about their situation, so we kind of know who they are, but also tell us where they are geographically, if they're comfortable giving us SES information, anything like that, so we have a place to pull rosters from to hold these meetings. If you'll remember, last year in February, we held about 120 meetings across the state where we talked to educators, we talked to parents, we talked to students, we talked to administrators in various discrete settings, so that we could talk to them exactly on their level and about what mattered to them, and get feedback from them on various aspects of the strategic plan. What we're going to do going forward is going to be very much modeled after that, talking to those 4 sort of categories of folks, making sure that we have time in each one of them to hear what it is, that not only get feedback on ideas that we're implementing, but just hear what their experiences are, so that we can incorporate that. Part of what we'll get through this sort of recruitment portal will be folks who are interested in attending a meeting in Austin, or attending a meeting in their local community, or providing us with answers to a survey. If we have a list of folks who are interested in just giving us survey data, that would be great. In addition to that, folks who would be interested in completing a one-on-one interview with TEA staff about their experiences. So really sort of pulling all that together at an aggregate, and being able to inform our practice going forward, and also be transparent with stakeholders across the state about what folks are telling us. So really being able to just publish that information whenever we have these meetings, everything published out there for the world to see, and sort of help us go forward that way.
Do you mind keeping me updated on some of the stakeholder engagement stuff?
Yeah,
the last question is, in the corrective action plan, you identified that TEA was going to provide some critical items to improve special education to local school districts. Can you talk about maybe what some of those critical items were, and and how you're communicating with local school districts, and then again, are we assessing those?
So I think there's an awful lot in the plan that is going to be provided to LEAs, almost all of which is going to be provided through these grants and contracts that we are in the middle of, or towards the end of getting awarded right now. And so as far as from the LEA perspective, they haven't seen very much from the plan yet, because it all has to go through this process of getting out, but it's all going to come very quickly and very furiously in the next few months. I think probably some of the things that you'll see, that districts will see initially, that will be of interest for them are resources around, as I've said several times throughout the presentation, Section 504 dyslexia and special education RTI, how all of that works together, and what the differences between all of those 4 various programs are, and how that impacts the local education agency.
Okay, wonderful. I appreciate you.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you. Thank you, Chairman.
Leo, come on up.
Mr. Chairman. I have a question.
Mr. Tallarico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Porter, thank you for sharing this information.
Yes,
I had a question about the increased demand for SPED teachers.
For teachers?
Yeah, so I read that we're going to need something like 9,000 more SPED teachers over the next 3 years after the cap's been lifted. And I know we're already struggling to keep, experienced SPED teachers, especially for our EcoDis students. So just had a question about, one, retention rate for SPED teachers currently, and if there's a plan to meet the shortage and the increased demand.
So I want to be clear. I think the number that you're quoting was from the press, correct? It wasn't from TEA. Yeah. So that isn't something that we produced or have validated. I think some of the work that we were talking about earlier with regard in one of the earlier presentations around alternative certification, as well as various ways to keep folks in that pipeline to being certified, is definitely going to be critical to that work. That sort of happens outside the Division of Special Education, but it's certainly something that we have a tremendous interest in, obviously. Because whether that 9,000 number is accurate or not, we do know that when you increase the number of kids in special ed, we know anecdotally that the districts struggle right now to staff their special education positions. And so going forward, as we increase the number of students in the system, we're definitely going to see an increase there, regardless of what the actual number is. And TEA needs to be proactive in helping LEAs meet those needs around having appropriately certified folks. One of the pieces of professional development that's going to happen through the strategic plan is some guidance to LEAs around how to better use their financial and human resources to maximize the what they already have in place, to make sure that they are using those teachers and their financial resources to the best of their ability going forward. Every district has their own funding formula. Districts have lots of different ways programmatically that they structure things, and with some guidance from various parts of the expertise in the field, we think that we can assist districts in sort of maximizing what they already have, and then also on top of that providing different ways through some of the work that educator preparation is doing around increasing the knowledge base of teachers going into the pipeline, but also just attracting the numbers of teachers that we're going to need.
So has the agency released an estimate of what the need
We
will
have
be?
not to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. Any other questions? Okay, Leo, you got my answer?
Yes, sir. So, good afternoon, Leo Lopez, TEA School Finance. So right now, it looks like the MFS gap would be about 40 million or so, roughly. However, we've just gotten updated pupil projections from the district. So, and I think you had a question earlier on the cost of special education on the FSP. And so we do need to rerun that whole analysis, and it is kind of complicated. We need to make sure we do it right. So I should have an updated MFS analysis in the next day or so. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to have that for this morning, but currently it looks much better given what we just looked at with the student counts. So that does that answer your question for now?
I think so. So you think you're still going to be 40 short for this is for the 18-19 school year?
Yes, I think that's what it looks like. What it's looking like right now. And of course,
Okay.
we don't have 18 and 19 enrollment counts just yet. I think in the school finance division, we have that a little later.
So if you're short 40 and you don't address it now relative through a supplemental or something along those lines, then you'll have to do the same thing that you've done in the past, which is write a check back to the feds, right?
That's my understanding. Yes, sir.
Okay. So we need to know that sooner than later.
Yes, sir.
And certainly with the appropriators, because if you're going to be short 40, you need to appropriate that money and get it into the classroom now. We need to do it now, but we can't wait until after the year's over. Yes, Ms. Gonzalez.
And we've been, as appropriations, we've been working with them, TEA on this. What was the total number? Because I know it's 40, 18, 19, but there are other years in which we are also that we don't have the maintenance of effort. So what is it? Do you know what the total number is so far?
I wasn't able to get all of them, but I can when I update the numbers, I'll have them for all the years.
But it's at least, I think, over 100 million.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes.
There was 1 year it was 130
Yes.
alone.
Right.
That's
so
correct.
I just want the committee to know that we have a structural problem in the maintenance of effort situation.
Well, it was supposed to grow itself out of it through the relief of the cap, right? I mean, that was part of it. But,
Yes, and we have seen some growth in the percentages.
But we don't know if it's all the way going to get there. So my point is that we still have time, which is, will be difficult. But if we could fund it and get it out, because there's no point in just sending it back to the feds.
Yes, sir.
I'd rather send it to the school districts and
Go to
get it
the
out to
kids.
them so they could, create some programs or something. But that would have to be something that we'd have to get done, approved, and get into. It has to count for 19. So, but let's say we had a bill, let's to reinstitute this grant program as an example. Got it passed, got it done, got 2/3, was signed into law prior to the end of the 19 year. Could that be utilized relative to your maintenance of effort?
I believe so. Yes, we would be able to distribute it.
Okay.
Prior to
Another way would be, we actually statutorily have, we tried to do this last year, statutorily we have a mechanism for providing additional resources to parents directly for tutoring and things of that nature. I can't remember exactly where it's at, but you have to appropriate the money. It's in the statute right now to be able to do that, but that could be another way to do it, right? So it gets out directly. So it's money that's been appropriated to be utilized to be spent. But does it have to be given to the districts, or can it be appropriated?
I would have to check on that to be sure.
All right, would you get back to us? Let us know if it's just an appropriation or it actually has to be distributed to the district account. I'm assuming it has to be distributed to the district.
Okay.
Okay. That's all I have. Anybody else? Any other questions? Going once, twice? All right, thank you guys, appreciate it. All right, so if there are no other further questions, that's going to conclude our hearing today. Next week, as I said to you, we will meet on Tuesday and Wednesday upon adjournment. On Tuesday, LBB and the TA staff will provide us with the refresher course on school finance mechanics, which are current today, and then some other little nuances to that. We're going to talk about runs, things of that nature. On Wednesday, we will then discuss the Texas Commission on Public School Finance recommendations. Following week, we'll meet again on Tuesday and Wednesday to receive input for and from a number of different advocacy and stakeholder groups on those recommendations and school finance in general. With that, I look forward to working with you over the next several months, and at this point, the committee stands adjourned, subject to call the chair.